Chapter 1. The Woman He Never Noticed. My husband thought I was invisible. He controlled the money, spoke for me in public, and planned our divorce behind my back with my best friend. What he never knew was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment for years. I'm Leora, and this is the story of how silence, patience, and the law did what anger never could. I used to believe that being quiet made life easier, that if I did not challenge the rhythm of my marriage, things would stay smooth enough to survive. People who knew us called Daniel Whitman a success story, chief operating officer of a regional logistics company outside Chicago. Confident, decisive, a man who always seemed to know what came next. Standing beside him, I was usually introduced as his wife, Leora. Not Leora the compliance consultant, not Leora the woman who paid attention to details most people ignored, just his wife. I was 43 when I finally understood how small he thought I was, but the truth is he had believed that from the beginning. We married in 2011. Daniel was already climbing fast then. I remembered the way he held my hand at our wedding reception in Naperville, smiling at his colleagues, already talking about expansion routes and contracts. I had just transitioned into freelance compliance work, consulting for small firms that needed help staying on the right side of regulations. He called it a hobby. He said it was nice that I liked staying busy. In public, he spoke for both of us. At dinners, he answered questions directed at me. At networking events, he summarized my opinions before I finished forming them. He managed the money because he said numbers stressed me out. He handled investments because that world was too aggressive for someone like me. I let him. At least, that is what everyone assumed. At home, control looked quieter. He kept documents in a locked drawer in his home office. He signed papers without mentioning them. When I asked about accounts, he smiled and said everything was handled. He liked saying that. Everything is handled. It sounded comforting if you wanted to be comforted. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, reinforced that rhythm without realizing it. She had raised Daniel to believe that stability came from keeping things calm. A good wife avoided confrontation. A good wife did not ask too many questions. When she visited, she reminded me that men carried enough pressure already. She said my role was to support, not complicate. Marissa Hale complicated things in a different way. Marissa and I met 15 years ago at a professional development seminar. We stayed close through pregnancies, career shifts, long phone calls about life not turning out the way we expected. She worked in human resources and had a way of making people feel seen. When Daniel started leaning on her for advice about company culture and staffing, I thought it was convenient. She understood his world. She listened when I was tired of listening. Over time, I noticed how often her name came up in our house, how frequently she stopped by unannounced, how she laughed a little too easily at his jokes. I noticed how Daniel stopped lowering his voice when he spoke to her on the phone, how he no longer bothered to explain why he was late. I did not accuse. I did not cry. I observed. That has always been my strength. I notice patterns. I notice when numbers do not align, when behaviors shift, when stories stop matching the facts that support them. In my work, that instinct keeps companies out of trouble. In my marriage, it kept me quiet. The signs came in pieces. A bank statement that no longer arrived in the mail, a credit card I did not recognize, a folder on Daniel's laptop that disappeared the moment I walked into the room. I told myself that successful people reorganize things, that privacy was not secrecy, that trust meant not looking too closely. Then there were the calls. Daniel started stepping outside late at night, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the driveway even in winter. When I asked who it was, he said work. He always said work. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. I began writing things down, dates, times, not because I planned to confront him, but because writing steadied me. It turned unease into something measurable, something I could revisit later and ask whether I had imagined it. The moment that changed everything did not come with shouting or discovery. It came quietly, like most truths do. I was folding laundry upstairs one evening when I heard Daniel's voice drift up from the kitchen. He was on speakerphone, distracted enough to forget that sound carries in a house like ours. He was talking about accounts, about moving things before they became complicated. He called it casually, like someone discussing travel plans. Then I heard Marissa respond, calm, familiar, present. I stood still, a clean shirt in my hands, and listened until my heart slowed, not because I was shocked, but because something finally aligned. The late nights, the missing documents, the shared glances I'd dismissed as coincidence. When the call ended, Daniel came upstairs and kissed my cheek like he always did. He asked what was for dinner. I smiled and told him I was thinking of making pasta. He nodded, satisfied, and went to shower. That was the moment I understood that nothing would be handed to me unless I took responsibility for it myself. I did not confront him that night or the next. I did not tell Marissa what I knew. I did not ask Evelyn for advice. I opened a new notebook and wrote one sentence on the first page: observe before you react. From that point on, I paid attention with intention. I saved emails that mentioned money. I noted changes in spending. I tracked how often Marissa appeared in Daniel's schedule. I did not accuse, because accusations warn people. I ended conversations politely. I asked questions that sounded harmless. I let them believe I was exactly who they thought I was. The quiet wife, the woman who did not understand finance, the one who trusted too easily. Silence, when used correctly, gives people room to reveal themselves. I did not know then how long this would take. I did not know what it would cost emotionally to sit at dinner tables and smile through conversations that felt rehearsed. I only knew that whatever came next needed to be deliberate, thought through, legal, clean. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I opened my laptop and created a file with today's date. I listed what I had heard, where I had heard it, and who was involved. Then I closed the computer and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. This was not the beginning of a confrontation. It was the beginning of preparation. And preparation, I would learn, changes everything if you give it time. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who believed your silence meant ignorance, stay with me. This is only the first step, and it's the quietest one. Chapter 2: 10 Years of Quiet Preparation. Preparation did not arrive as a dramatic decision. It arrived as curiosity that refused to quiet down. In the months after that night, I began asking questions I had never asked before, not out loud, on my own, about where I stood legally, about what protection actually meant when trust failed, about what happened to women who assumed love was enough. In 2014, I scheduled my first consultation with Thomas Reed. I did not tell Daniel. I did not hide it either. I framed it as long-term planning, the kind of thing responsible adults did. Estate considerations, contingencies, a polite phrase that made people nod without probing. Thomas was calm in the way seasoned attorneys are. He listened more than he spoke. He did not jump to conclusions. When I asked him what would happen if a marriage ended and one spouse controlled most of the financial decisions, he answered without drama. He talked about structures, timelines, protections that existed quietly in the background of the law. He did not ask why I needed to know. I left that office with a folder and a feeling I had not experienced in years: clarity. Over the next year, I returned to him periodically. Each meeting had a purpose. Each conversation was framed as education, not action. I wanted to understand how trusts worked, what made them enforceable, what made them visible without being vulnerable. In 2015, with full transparency and no secrecy, I established a personal trust. It was legal. It was documented. It violated nothing. At the time, it felt theoretical. Years later, it would become foundational. At home, nothing changed on the surface. Daniel continued running the household finances. He expanded his role at the company. He grew more confident, more dismissive. My work remained something he described as light, flexible, safe. He liked that I was not competitive. He liked that I did not threaten his sense of importance. Marissa remained present. She advised Daniel on staffing decisions. She helped him navigate internal conflicts. She talked about people like pieces on a board, who to promote, who to move aside. I noticed how often she referenced information that felt too detailed, too informed for casual conversation. In my own work, I began sharpening a skill I had always relied on: pattern recognition. I started learning how to read financial statements not just for compliance, but for behavior. What did unusual transfers suggest? What did delayed reporting indicate? I was not looking for proof. I was learning a language. In 2018, I met Nina Alvarez. She was recommended by a colleague as someone who could explain complex financial systems without condescension. We met for coffee near the office park where Daniel worked, though I never told him. Nina talked about forensic accounting as storytelling. Money moved with intention. Numbers left fingerprints. Most people never looked closely enough to see them. I did not hire her to investigate my husband. I hired her to teach me what irregularity looked like. She never asks why. Professionals rarely do. Years passed. Our marriage settled into a rhythm that felt predictable. Daniel assumed I was comfortable. Evelyn continued reminding me that stability mattered more than independence. Marissa moved freely through our lives, confident in her role. Then one afternoon, while organizing files Daniel had asked me to shred, I found a draft. Not a final document, a plan. It outlined steps, timing, language about separation framed as initiative. It was not emotional, it was strategic. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, slowly. I felt nothing rush through me. No panic, no disbelief, just confirmation. What Daniel did not know was that I had already imagined this moment, that I had asked Thomas these questions years earlier, that I had positioned myself quietly, legally, deliberately. I returned the papers to where I found them. I cooked dinner. I listened as Daniel talked about work, about Marissa, about the future he assumed he controlled. Inside, I adjusted nothing. Externally, I remained exactly who he expected me to be. That night, I added another entry into my notebook, not emotional, factual. Preparation, I learned, works best when it remains invisible. I did not feel victorious. I felt steady, and steadiness, I would discover, was the most dangerous thing I could possess. Chapter 3. The day everything looked normal. Daniel chose the timing carefully. Early spring of 2024, when everything looked calm on the surface. The company had just closed a strong quarter. Our son was busy with school. Nothing in our daily life suggested collapse. That was exactly why he believed he held the advantage. He asked me to talk on a Sunday evening, his voice measured, almost kind. "We should sit down and be honest with each other," he said. "Clear things up before they get messy." I nodded. I even thanked him for being thoughtful. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in a law office downtown, glass walls, neutral art, the kind of place designed to make difficult conversations feel procedural. Daniel arrived confident, briefcase in hand. Marissa was with him, positioned slightly behind his shoulder, close enough to signal alliance. Evelyn joined by speakerphone, insisting she wanted to help keep things civilized. Thomas Reed greeted us politely. He looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, just enough to ask a silent question. I gave a slight nod. Daniel did most of the talking. He explained that he wanted an amicable divorce, that he believed in fairness, that he had already outlined a reasonable division of assets based on contribution and earning power. He slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Marissa leaned forward. "This really is the cleanest option," she said. "No one benefits from dragging things out." Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, thin but firm. "Leora, please don't turn this into a fight. Think about your son. Think about appearances." I listened. I always listened. Daniel walked us through the numbers. Accounts he controlled, investments he claimed responsibility for, properties he believed were unquestionably his domain. He spoke as if reading from a script he had rehearsed many times. "This reflects reality," he said. "I've handled most of the financial risk. It makes sense." I did not interrupt. I did not challenge a single figure. I asked no questions. Thomas let Daniel finish. Then he folded his hands and turned toward me. "Leora, would you like me to walk through the documents we prepared?" Daniel stiffened slightly. "What documents?" he asked. Thomas opened a folder that looked identical to Daniel's. Inside were papers dated years earlier, trust agreements, financial structures, records of transparency and compliance. Everything clean, everything legal. As Thomas spoke, I watched Daniel's expression change in stages. Confusion first, then irritation, then something closer to disbelief. "This trust was established in 2015, fully disclosed, properly filed. It predates several of the assets you referenced." Marissa leaned forward again, her voice sharper now. "That doesn't mean it overrides marital property." Thomas nodded. "It does not override it. It defines it." Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, as if searching for a reaction he could understand. "You knew about this," he said. It was not a question. I met his gaze. "I understood my position," I replied. The room felt suddenly smaller. Evelyn's voice crackled through the speaker. "Leora, why are we hearing about this now?" Thomas answered before I could. "Because now is when it matters." Daniel flipped through the pages, faster now, his movements losing precision. "This has to be reversible," he said. "There has to be some way to renegotiate." Thomas had a shed. It was structured specifically to prevent that. For the first time in years, Daniel did not control the conversation. He raised his voice, then caught himself. He glanced at Marissa, who said nothing now, her earlier confidence gone. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "You never said anything." I spoke quietly. "You never asked." Silence settled over the table. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy. The meeting ended the way professional meetings always do, with signatures, with acknowledgments, with procedures that continued regardless of emotion. Daniel gathered his papers, his hands no longer steady. Marissa avoided my eyes. Evelyn disconnected without another word. As we stood to leave, Daniel stopped me near the door. "You think this means you win," he said under his breath. I looked at him calmly. "No," I said. "This just means the truth is finally doing its job." I walked out of the office alone, the city noise rushing back in, ordinary and indifferent. Behind me, Daniel remained inside, still trying to regain control of a narrative that no longer belonged to him. That day did not destroy him, not yet. It simply removed the illusion that he had ever been the only one prepared. If you were waiting for the moment when everything collapses at once, this is not it. This is the moment when gravity shifts, when what has been carefully set in place begins to move on its own. Chapter 4. When Silence Collects Interest. Momentum has a sound when it shifts. It is not loud, but it is unmistakable if you know what to listen for. In the weeks after the divorce paperwork was finalized, I heard it everywhere. in the way Daniel stopped returning calls, in the way his calendar suddenly had gaps, in the way silence followed him instead of certainty. The first sign came through an email he forgot to delete. It appeared on the shared tablet we still used for our son's school schedule. A subject line from his company flagged urgent review. I did not open it. I did not need to. The tension in his shoulders that night told me enough. He barely touched his dinner. He checked his phone repeatedly. When Lucas asked him about a college tour, Daniel nodded without listening. Later that evening, he finally spoke. "They are reviewing old transfers," he said, trying to sound casual. "Routine audit stuff." I watched him closely. "That happens," I replied. He nodded, relieved that I did not press further. He had no idea how familiar those transfers were to me. Daniel's company had grown aggressively over the last decade. Expansion came with complexity. Complexity created blind spots. Blind spots were where decisions lived when people thought no one was watching. I had been watching, quietly, legally, for years. The meeting that rattled him happened on a Wednesday morning. He left early, dressed sharper than usual. When he returned, he went straight to his office and closed the door. The house felt different with that door shut, tighter. That evening, he confronted me in the kitchen. "You talked to someone," he said. I met his eyes calmly. "I talk to a lot of people," I answered. He searched my face for something, guilt, fear, a slip. He found none. Inside his company, the questions multiplied. Transfers that did not align with reported expenses, timing that suggested intent rather than coincidence, oversight committees that asked for documentation he could not immediately provide. Marissa felt it too. Her calls slowed. Her visits stopped. When she did appear, it was only briefly, only when Daniel was present. Her confidence had dulled. I heard through a mutual contact that she had been excluded from internal discussions, that people were asking how much she knew and when. She called me one afternoon. "I feel like everyone is looking at me," she said, "like I did something wrong." I kept my voice steady. "That happens when things change," I replied. Evelyn noticed the shift in a different way. She called me one evening, her tone uncertain. "Daniel seems stressed," she said. "Never thought it would come to this." I did not respond right away. "Neither did I said quietly. For the first time, she did not remind me to stay silent. Lucas remained my anchor. He sensed the tension, but did not ask questions. Teenagers know when answers are complicated. I kept everything within the law because I refused to let my son inherit chaos. I wanted him to see that consequences could exist without spectacle. The meeting that mattered most happened months later, after the investigation had widened. Daniel asked to see me, not at the house, not at his office, a neutral place downtown, a quiet restaurant near the river. Marissa was there when I arrived, sitting beside him. Both of them looked smaller than I remembered. Daniel spoke first. "This has gone far enough," he said. "We need to talk." I sat down slowly. "We are talking," I replied. Marissa leaned forward, her voice tight. "You always knew more than you let on." I looked at her, then back at Daniel. "I knew enough to prepare." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You could have stopped this. You could have warned me." I paused. The room felt still. "I understood the rules before you decided to bend them. That was all." Marissa's face drained of color. Daniel stared at the table, his hands clenched. In that moment, they saw me clearly for the first time, not as the quiet wife, not as the afterthought, but as someone who had been paying attention while they assumed control was permanent. I stood and gathered my bag. "There is nothing else to say," I added. As I walked out, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a sense of alignment, things moving where they had always been headed.
Outside, the city moved on. Traffic flowed, people laughed, life continued without pause. Inside that restaurant, two people sat with the realization that silence does not mean absence, it means patience. I went home that night and slept deeply, not because everything was finished, but because I no longer needed to watch so closely. The systems I had trusted were doing what they were designed to do.
Chapter 5. Revenge Without Raising My Voice. Life did not announce its return to normal. It simply resumed in small, ordinary ways. Mornings arrived on schedule. Coffee brewed. Traffic moved. Lucas complained about early classes and left his backpack by the door no matter how many times I reminded him not to. I went back to work without ceremony. Compliance projects, policy reviews, quiet calls with companies that wanted to stay out of trouble. The same work I had always done, now uninterrupted by the constant weight of being overlooked in my own home. I did not follow news about Daniel. I did not ask mutual acquaintances how things were unfolding. Distance was not avoidance, it was choice. On most evenings, I cooked simple meals and listened to my son talk about his plans, college visits, friends, dreams that did not require permission. I noticed how much lighter the house felt without tension humming under every conversation. Silence had changed its meaning. It was no longer something imposed on me. It belonged to me now. Once, Lucas asked if everything was finally settled. "It is," I said. "Are you okay?" he asked. I smiled. "I am more than okay." I realized then that my definition of victory had shifted. For years, I thought winning meant exposure or acknowledgement, or watching someone else fall. Instead, it looked like freedom from needing to look back. I no longer measured my worth against what Daniel lost. I measured it against how fully I occupied my own life. There were moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly, a phrase he used to repeat, a look he gave when he thought I was not paying attention. Those memories no longer carried power. They were simply information, archived, closed. One afternoon, while reviewing a client contract, I caught my reflection in the window. Calm, unhurried, present. I recognized myself again, not as a role or a shadow, but as a person who trusted her own judgment. That was the real outcome. I had not taken anything from anyone. I had reclaimed myself. I understood then that revenge, when done with intention and restraint, does not need an audience. It does not raise its voice. It does not rush. It prepares. It respects the rules, and then it steps aside while consequences do what they were always going to do. If you are listening to this and thinking about your own silence, I want you to hear this clearly. Silence is not weakness when it is chosen. Preparation is not paranoia when it is informed, and strength does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience paired with knowledge. If my story resonates with you, if you have ever felt underestimated or erased, stay curious. Learn the systems that shape your life. Ask questions before you need answers. And remember that the most powerful shift often happens quietly, long before anyone else notices. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it gave you something to think about, I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, preparation, and reclaiming control without losing yourself, stay here with me.